Imagine you're born into a world where your entire life, your house, your food, your future is already decided. Not by talent, not by effort, by rank. At the top, a man in silk who hasn't swung a sword in 20 years. At the bottom, a man who has done nothing but swing swords and still can't afford rice. Same system, same rules, completely different lives. Now, what if I told you that system never actually ended? It just changed its uniform. This is the story of every samurai rank and what it actually felt like to live inside each one. Feudal Japan ran on something called the Shino-Kosho system. 4 tiers, strict order, no elevators. At the top, the samurai, the warrior class. Below them, the farmers, who fed everyone and owned nothing. Then, the artisans, who built everything and got credit for nothing. And at the bottom, the merchants, who, ironically, made the most money and were trusted the least. Above all of them sat the shogun, the military dictator pretending to serve an emperor who had no actual power. And technically, even further above everyone else, the daimyo, regional lords who controlled land, taxes, and the lives of thousands. Here's what the textbooks don't tell you. The system wasn't just political. It was economic. It was psychological. It was enforced not just by swords, but by debt, obligation, and the terrifying social cost of stepping out of line. Sound familiar? Let's walk through every rank, from the silk robes at the top to the mud at the bottom, and let's be honest about what each one actually cost. The shogun. The man who ran Japan without technically being Japan. The emperor was the symbol. The shogun was the machine. Here's how that worked. The emperor held divine legitimacy. The shogun held every army, every tax, every road. So the shogun would bow to the emperor and then go make every single decision the emperor wasn't allowed to make. Emperor, I am the son of heaven. Shogun, wonderful, sign this. It's a neat trick. You get the authority without the accountability. The symbol takes the blame. The machine keeps running. Economically, the shogun controlled the Sankin Kotai system, a brilliant, ruthless piece of financial engineering. Every daimyo was required to spend alternating years in Edo, the shogun's capital, and when they left to go home, their family stayed behind. Hostages, politely. But here's the economic genius. Those constant mandatory journeys across Japan cost the daimyo enormous amounts of money. Food, retainers, lodging, ceremony, which meant the regional lords were perpetually cash poor, too broke to fund a rebellion, by design. The shogun didn't need to watch every lord with a sword. He just made sure they were always slightly financially exhausted. Controlling people through liquidity constraints is not a medieval idea. It's a Tuesday. The daimyo were the regional lords. Think of them as franchise owners in a system where corporate headquarters could revoke your license at any time for any reason. They controlled land, they taxed farmers, they maintained armies, they threw elaborate parties they couldn't really afford. On paper, powerful. In practice, middle management with better hats. A daimyo's wealth was measured in koku, the amount of rice needed to feed one person for 1 year. 1 koku, 1 person, 1 year. A large domain might produce 100,000 koku. Sounds impressive until you calculate how much it cost to maintain your armies, supply your Edo residents, fund your processions, and keep your samurai retainers paid. Many daimyo were quietly insolvent for most of their reign. They borrowed from merchants, the very class they were supposed to look down on, and prayed that harvest season was generous. The daimyo was powerful the way a CEO with maxed out corporate cards is powerful. The title is real. The balance sheet is a different conversation. Now we reach the samurai themselves. And here's where the story gets complicated, because samurai wasn't one thing, it was a spectrum. At the top of the samurai class, senior retainers, advisors, generals, men with stipends, land grants, and real access to power. In the middle, administrators, junior officers, gate guards, men with a title and a sword and a salary that hadn't been adjusted since their grandfather's time. At the bottom, low-ranking foot soldiers and castle staff, men who technically had status but practically had very little else. Here's the uncomfortable math. By the mid-Edo period, Japan was experiencing something no one had planned for: peace. Prolonged, sustained, structurally awkward peace. Samurai warriors were a class in a country that had stopped fighting wars. Their stipends, paid in rice, were fixed. Rice prices fluctuated. Inflation didn't care about tradition. So samurai increasingly found themselves doing what they were trained to despise, selling their swords, literally, taking in piecework, secretly doing crafts or trade on the side, borrowing from merchants. Some sold their samurai status entirely, a kind of feudal class bankruptcy. The warrior class was quietly doing what every over-leveraged institution eventually does, liquidating its identity to cover its expenses. Merchant: that's quite a sword. Samurai: I need 8 koku worth of rice credit. Merchant: I see. And the sword? Samurai: it's not for sale. Pause. Of course not. The cruelest part, the samurai still had to dress the part, maintain the appearance of status while quietly managing a very non-glamorous financial reality. That cost money too. The uniform of prestige is always expensive. And then there were the ronin, samurai without masters. Not by choice usually. Their lord had died, been disgraced, or had his domain seized, and suddenly, no stipend, no home base, no institutional backing. Just a sword, a reputation, and an open road. Economically, the ronin was a skilled professional in a saturated market with no safety net. Some became teachers. Sword schools were their version of consulting firms. Some became bodyguards. Some became mercenaries. Some became criminals. Some became philosophers, desperately. The ronin is the freelancer of feudal Japan. All the skill, all the risk, none of the institutional protection. And here's what's fascinating. The shogunate was genuinely afraid of ronin, not because of one ronin, but because by the 1600s there were estimates of 400,000 to 500,000 ronin wandering Japan. That's 500,000 trained fighters with no institutional loyalty, no income, and nothing particularly reassuring to do with their time. A structural unemployment crisis wearing armor. The solution: force them to become monks, farmers, or administrators. Reassign the surplus, absorb the volatility. It works until it doesn't. Here's the irony the system never acknowledged. The farmers fed everyone. The shogun ate their rice. The daimyo taxed their rice. The samurai were paid in their rice. And the farmers often couldn't keep enough of it to make it through winter. Tax rates varied, but a common structure was 40 to 60% of a farmer's yield, gone immediately to the lord above. And yet, in the Confucian framework that shaped this hierarchy, farmers ranked second above artisans and merchants because they produced real things. They worked with the earth. They were considered morally superior to people who sold things for profit. They were ranked second and treated accordingly, which is to say, they were taxed, conscripted, and periodically left to starve during bad harvests with the full theoretical respect of the state. Daimyo: you are the backbone of Japan. Farmer: I understand. Daimyo: we will need 50% of the harvest. Farmer: it was a bad year. Daimyo: Japan appreciates your sacrifice. Peasant uprisings, Ikki,
happened regularly, not because farmers were rebellious by nature, but because when the math no longer worked and people had nothing left to lose, the math